Welcome to ChatGPT at Home, a ChatGPT-like app written entirely by ChatGPT. I mostly filmed this back in December, but then my wife Stephanie and I had twins, and honestly I've just been lucky if I can just get a shower in for the day. But I've been working on getting much more efficient at caring for them and multitasking. So here I am with this video finally. One of the main things that I wanted to show here is just how powerful ChatGPT is compared to even something like Copilot for the task of software development. Both of these models are technologically very similar models, and yet ChatGPT offers what appears to be a massive leap forward in functionality by way of actual scope limitation of all things. I wanted to come up with a fairly advanced example of a piece of software that would be impossible to reliably create with Copilot, but would show off why ChatGPT and a chatbot sort of scope for a generative model is so powerful. So getting things started, ChatGPT has come up with a sort of outline for how things will work, but no code yet. So we can just simply begin asking for code. At first, we just get some snippet examples about like how this might work in a really basic way, but it's not really an altogether script that we can just immediately use. Again, though, we can just ask for that. Copy the code, paste it into an editor, and run it, and here we hit our first of many snags. But this is where ChatGPT starts to shine over a purely generative model like Copilot. We can copy and paste this error, and ChatGPT suggests some ideas for us to fix it. In this case, I opt to just change the port for the app, rerun it, and here we have our basic website. All we have here so far, though, is really just a basic Flask app demo. There's certainly nothing impressive yet here. So let's ask ChatGPT to start integrating a large language model and chatbot structure. Again, initially ChatGPT just kind of shows us some snippets to get this done, which could be useful if you're already a developer, but we're trying to do literally no work here. So let's instead ask for the full script up to this point, and there we have it. Throughout this video, there's a lot of me requesting things like the full script. I'm not going to show it every single time, but just know it's as simple as this to get what you want. Next, we'll run things. The language model is downloading from Hugging Face. Things are looking pretty good, like we're making maybe some progress, but now we're hitting yet again another error. Again, the power of ChatGPT is we can just copy and paste this error. We don't even have to further describe it most of the time. You just copy and paste the error, copy and paste the change suggested, try again, another day, another error, another copy and paste of the error, and another answer that tries to teach us what the problem might be. But we really just want that code. So we'll just ask for that, throw in a request for the HTML template while we're at it, and boom. I also had been getting annoyed at needing to go to like /chatbot instead of just going to the homepage. So I'm also requesting ChatGPT changes the URL path to the chat page to just be at that index. So I don't have to keep doing that either. From here, we get the code for the Python file and HTML. I already know where this HTML template should go, but just for fun, I asked ChatGPT where to put it. Alternatively, I am pretty confident if we just put it like in the directory that we're working in and then ran it, we would get an error and we could just report that error to ChatGPT, and ChatGPT would almost certainly fix the problem for us and tell us, well, we need to put the template where we need to put it. Either way, even really simple basic stuff like this, like showing us that outline, I think it's just really interesting just how useful ChatGPT can be, even just for stuff like this, making it just extremely clear where the template should go with this sort of directory outline. But of course, we hit yet another error. And again, I report this error to ChatGPT and we go back and forth for a bit. Once we're at a point where I think maybe ChatGPT knows what's right to do, again, I just ask for the full script. Then finally, moment of truth, and it's another error. This happens a lot here, and I'm just going to save you the annoyance of the back and forth and all of that, but it really was just constantly copying and pasting errors and copy and pasting the suggested code to fix it. So then finally we have traction and things are starting to work. We at least have a generation. That said, this generation does look a little weird. While the logic isn't quite yet here to make this language model a chatbot, the generation really should be fairly coherent at least. And it's not. To fight this, I began describing the issue to ChatGPT. This was probably the hardest spot in the entire exercise because I was really just doing my best to act like I didn't know anything about anything going on here, like as if I was somebody who just didn't know anything about large language models or programming or anything like that. Eventually we get through it, but I did have to suggest that maybe there was something going wrong with the tokenizer. But that's literally all I said. I just said, hey, I think something might be wrong with the tokenizer. And finally, we do start to get some coherent results. So it's not formatted how I would like just yet. It's purely generating a continuation, but that is indeed all large language models do without any further instruction. In order to be a chatbot like ChatGPT, all you need to do is suggest to the language model that what it should continue producing is a chatbot dialogue or a chat log. We can do this with a pre-prompt. So our text input field on our website is our prompt to the model. But we can actually use this text input to build on top of a starting prompt that we set in the Python logic in the back end that already gets the ball rolling for this sort of chatbot dialogue. And that is the secret, the magic of making a large language model behave like a chatbot. This is probably very similar to what ChatGPT is doing. It just has a pre-prompt that coaxes it into being a chatbot, and then there is some logic that kind of splits it apart and makes it appear like it's a chat dialogue to you, the user, in the UI. But there's really nothing more fancy about it. It is just fooling the large language model into continuing this sort of dialogue. From here, I just start tackling each problem one by one. Often I found it useful to just kind of reset by telling ChatGPT, hey, here's my current code. I describe whatever the current issue was that, was going wrong, and then what I really wanted to happen. After some further back and forth, I am starting to make some real progress. As you can see, we need to probably stop the generation once it's done with the bot's response. Again, these are generative models. So it's going to just keep generating until it hits some sort of stop token. And what this often can mean is it's actually going to continue generating its own new human input. There's nothing that tells this large language model that, hey, you got to stop when, after you generate the bot's response, don't keep generating the human response. All it wants to do is just keep generating responses. So that's what it's going to do, and it's most likely to just go ahead and start generating a human response. And then maybe another bot response, or even, as we can see here, where it adds an actual other input entirely called robots. So from here, speeding things up quite a bit for a moment, I work to clip the final generation to stop once the bot response generation is done. And then I start working on keeping a history of the chat ongoing. I also found this step to take quite a bit of time for ChatGPT to finally figure out. It was a lot of back and forth and trial and error, like making sure the history was still there, keeping it in the session, all that. That said, the part that took the longest here was actually just the ChatGPT arbitrary delay in text output. In reality, once a sequence is chosen, the full sequence is actually already known, and it could be output immediately. What this means is once you see that ChatGPT starts to display text, the full output that it's going to show you is actually already known. They're just slowing things down for you. I think OpenAI just does this with ChatGPT to slow big queries down and to reduce overall system load on what is otherwise a totally free application. So if ChatGPT wasn't limited in this way, this problem would have been resolved much faster, and the entire project would have taken probably less than an hour total to build, which would be faster than I could probably have done it myself. Because even as a developer myself, there's no way I could just sit down and write this application without any errors. So you're still going to have this like back and forth when you get errors or things aren't working in the way that you expected them to work. You're still going to do the debugging. It's just here ChatGPT is doing the debugging, and each time ChatGPT thinks about, what might be going wrong and proposes solutions, we're like just waiting on this like arbitrarily slowed down generation. And that doesn't have to be the case. So this could be way faster and actually way more powerful if that just wasn't there. So if there is some sort of premium ChatGPT in the future, I would hope that this kind of arbitrary slowdown would be gone. And again, at any point where I felt like ChatGPT was going in circles or maybe just needed a reset sort of, I would just copy and paste my full code, explain what the latest issue was that I was having, and this would usually resolve the problem. After this process of just reporting issues and getting new code to try, we finally have reached a point where we have a chat history that is working. It's not a great history at this point, but we're still just doing R&D. And we're also starting with a very small model and a probably not great pre-prompt yet. But also, this is ChatGPT at home and not actually ChatGPT. So we are using that 125 million parameter model as opposed to like GPT-3, for example, is 175 billion with a B parameters. So these are very, very different models. I will show an example at the end with a larger model in the back end, but this is also what's actually kind of cool about an app like the one I'm building here. This is an app I actually want. We can swap in and out different language models in the back end because we're using that Hugging Face Transformers library. We can just change the language model that's running in the back end, and so you can run any of a whole host of different models. So depending on the type of machinery that you're running things on, or the quality, I guess, of the chatbot that you want, you can easily swap in and out things. Anyway, at this point, things are functioning as expected from what I can tell, and I do ask to add a reset button so I don't have to like start the app over and reload that model into memory and all that. And also so I don't have to like refresh the page and all that. Even this tiny request of just a reset button is actually somewhat challenging because this means not just adding a reset button in HTML, but it's adding the callback to actually do it and reset that chat history and clear that variable in the session and so on. Of course, we do still hit some small snags on the way too, so we just report those snags, copy pasta, what ChatGPT suggests, and we finally wind up with a functioning reset button. At this point, the hard part honestly is done. The actual logic and hard part of tying everything together is done, and now we just need to kind of clean things up a bit. First, we'll address the stopping generation output after the bot's response. ChatGPT makes pretty quick work of this problem, and through some testing, it does look like it does finally work. We're getting so close to being complete here, but then with some further testing, I happen to catch that there's also instances of a lowercase human colon. And that's getting generated, and we need to handle for that as well. While handling for that lowercase issue, I noticed that ChatGPT really has just solved this by lowercasing everything. Again, we need to find a different solution. After expressing this issue to ChatGPT, the problem is solved. After all this, it's time to make things look a little better, so I pass along my current HTML code and ask ChatGPT to help me style it. Okay, this is at least a little better, but it's still not great yet. So we'll start tackling issues starting with the reset buttonception that's going on with a reset button in a button. Anyway, great, that's done. Next, I'll try to address the overall kind of layout, but the result winds up being a little goofy. The padding issue is fixed, but I don't really want this side-by-side solution. I suppose in some ways this could be kind of a cool structure, but that's not what I was going for. So I asked ChatGPT to stack these elements vertically, and again, that seems to have worked out. Even though this is just HTML and CSS, I just can't stress enough how kind of complicated this really is linguistically to then translate it to HTML code and actually achieve the result that I was asking for in such a simple way. And really all the steps that have been taken so far, it really is. I struggle to recognize how incredible this technology really is, that we're actually doing something like this, creating this app that, while it is kind of a basic simplistic-ish app, it's also a pretty complicated app that requires multiple disciplines coming together and just a general understanding not only of human language, but also programming and tying all these things together. And it really does blow my mind. Anyways, the final major stylistic change that I'd like to make is to color the bot and human messages differently, like different colored chat bubbles. In contrast to what I was just saying, interestingly, this was actually somewhat challenging to do for ChatGPT. It is kind of comical what ChatGPT has a hard time with versus what it just like blows through easily. So despite this being what seems like it should be a simple task of coloring every other message a different color, since at least right now for every human input you will have a bot response output, so it will always be 1 and 1, so every other could be colored. There's so many ways that this could get done. Despite this simplicity, this actually took quite a bit of back and forth to get working. Again, this would have been very fast if I wasn't having to wait on that ChatGPT arbitrary sequence output that is just like, I think probably just JavaScript that is just slowing it down. This wouldn't have been that long, but this did take quite a bit of time. I think to some extent this was due to me also having an outdated Jinja, but I still would have expected ChatGPT to maybe solve this problem in another way once it realizes it's run out of ideas for Jinja template logic, maybe use JavaScript or something like that. So anyway, we eventually did get this resolved, but this was pretty hard. Because initially we do get those chat bubbles, but they're not differently colored. But after a while, we do finally overcome the issue, as well as make our way to what I would consider a minimal viable product that is ChatGPT at home, created with ChatGPT, or rather created by ChatGPT. Here's an example with the 125 million parameter model. This is a very, very small model. As you can see, the response time is quite fast and it feels pretty darn good. This model isn't even going to be remotely comparable to ChatGPT, but as you can see, it's actually somewhat decent, all things considered. This model isn't going to be coding for you. It's not going to be doing anything like what's shown in this video. But like I said before, we can actually just swap out the backend model now to something much, much larger. So for example, we can check out the 66 billion parameter model. And here's where things get a little tougher to run. Unfortunately, I don't have any A or H100 GPUs just lying around, so I'm actually running this on the Puget workstation with a terabyte of RAM. It will get the job done. It will just be slow. We would much prefer this to be running on the GPU, but I don't have 250 plus gigs of memory on my GPUs. I also took the liberty to have a little more fun and actually asked ChatGPT to generate a chat log between a human and a bot, where the bot was a sassy bot. And I'm using that chat generation as the pre-prompt here. The first response from this 66 bill parameter model takes almost 25 minutes to complete. That's quite a difference from the 125 million parameter model that felt very snappy, almost instantaneous. But this is often the case that the very first inference on a model that you just loaded onto either memory or your GPU, it does tend to take a lot longer. So let's go ahead and try another one. So the second and third responses are lightning fast at a whopping 2 minutes. I think we could have a lot of fun with this model, and I would like to dig around a little more, but 2-minute inference time is a bit brutal. It's going to make R&D quite hard. But I think it would be cool to find a solid pre-prompt that functions closer to ChatGPT's full capabilities. That said, ChatGPT also did have a sort of reinforcement learning layer on top. As far as I understand, that reinforcement learning layer, though, was more so meant for like Turing test passing. So just people seeing those responses from the chatbot and either thinking that they were human generated or bot generated, like what responses looked good or what they were actually looking for. So I don't think that the actual backend language models need that much work. And so it would be interesting to see if someone can come up with a good solid pre-prompt. I don't think anybody actually knows. I don't think OpenAI has released what is the pre-prompt to ChatGPT, but that could be very interesting. I'm also just curious, like, how long is the pre-prompt? Like, how much information is in that pre-prompt before you get to even start playing? Because also, ChatGPT does seem to allow for a very long chat dialogue that it still seems to remember the history of. So I also don't know if they're doing something interesting in the back end where maybe they're compressing that information down. So for example, if you have a really long dialogue with ChatGPT, it's conceivable that you could actually use ChatGPT to take some dialogue and ask it, hey, please compress this down to maybe a paragraph. And then it compresses that down, and then that goes into the pre-prompt. So it's possible they're doing stuff like that. And again, with this app, there's no reason why we can't do the exact same thing with this application. So anyway, I will upload everything to GitHub if anybody wants to play around more with this. There are issues in the script. You can find them if you want. I'm not too worried about it being like a perfect app. If anything, I would encourage anyone who wants to keep building on it if they want, especially if you continue building on it with ChatGPT. I want to see how far this can go because I don't think it's done. I think that there's much more that ChatGPT could make of this. So anyways, I will put a link in the description to the GitHub for everything up to this point. And again, you can just show like the Python code and or the HTML code and just say, here's my current code. Here's what I want to do next. and go from there. So anyway, I think a lot of cool software can be made with Copilot, but there's really nothing like this. And with Copilot, you really have to have that starting prompt. It has to be perfect for what you're trying to achieve. And if it at any point it gets lost or produces an error, it's impossible to overcome it with just Copilot. You must have a programmer kind of help overcome it. And I'm not trying to knock Copilot. I love Copilot. I use it every day, all the time. But it is very interesting to me, again, that Copilot, I would say the scope of Copilot is much wider than the scope of ChatGPT. ChatGPT has been narrowed very specifically to be a chatbot, and yet through that scope limitation, it is very interesting that the functionality has just exploded for ChatGPT based on that scope limitation. It's curious. And I think the main reason why it's such an explosion in performance is ChatGPT is not perfect. It says dumb things, it makes mistakes in software, but the fact that you can report what's wrong and then it thinks about it and changes accordingly and suggests a different way of going about it, that's what makes ChatGPT, that's what makes all the difference. And that's why maybe for playing a doctor or arguing a legal case or something like that, ChatGPT is probably not the greatest idea because it will make mistakes. But when it comes to something like software development, it's just unquestionably powerful that you can make pretty advanced software with little to no understanding of what you're doing, which is it's just incredible. If you're interested in learning more about neural networks and how they work, then check out nnfs.io. Otherwise, I will see you all in another video.